Hi, everybody. I'm Jared.
And I'm Jordan.
And this is episode 2 of the I Think It's Time podcast. Today, we speak with Dr. Faith Harper, who, among her many titles, is an author and a licensed professional counselor based out of San Antonio, Texas.
We speak with her about some of her recent books and pick her brain about mental health during this time and ways people can continue to cope. So enjoy and subscribe.
All right. So Dr. Faith Harper, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to chat with you today. There's a lot that we want to talk with you about. We've been reading many of your books, and a lot of the topics that you cover are very timely and important. Given all that we're dealing with today, and the pandemic and how it's just flipped our entire world upside down. We think that your voice can really help a lot of people. So we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And the thing that I think drew me to your work was the approach that you take. It's a very straight to the point, practical, tangible, and honest one. And I think the way that you curse, you keep it real. It's refreshing. And this book right here, This Is Your Brain on Anxiety, was helpful to me, just as someone who deals with a lot of anxiety in different forms. But we'll get into that in a few. But if you could start by just describing a little bit about yourself and how you became who you are today.
Sure. So I'm a therapist in private practice in San Antonio. Undersells it a little bit, but I've always worked in the field. I've always worked in mental health. I was a case manager, worked with people with very severe chronic mental illness, usually co-occurring with substance use, those kinds of things. Like really liked working with the people that nobody else wanted to work with, that society had said, we don't really have anything to give you. So that was always my population. Decided at some point that it'd be really nice to make more than $40,000 a year. So I went back to school, went to graduate school thinking I'll become a licensed therapist, and really enjoyed the program. Did manage to get myself in a lot of trouble by arguing with professors about, the function of, things going on in the world and how we're not talking about that. And, arguing from my first class on. So it's amazing to me that they liked me anyway and encouraged me to do my doctorate, that they did. And I had a lot of people really support me and encourage me to do that. And then my doctoral research was on co-occurring disorders and how they came to be and how to treat them in indigenous populations. Research is me search. Like that's my area. That's my family dynamic, and kept running into trauma, specifically epigenetic trauma, intergenerational trauma, and how we needed to work with that. And so, most programs are getting better about it, but most programs don't spend a lot of time on trauma. And so I really had to learn more and do deep dives into that, and got very passionate about that work and bringing it into other places that I was working, bringing trauma-informed care into community mental health. And which is its own thing, getting people to do things right is sometimes an issue. Finally gave up and I'm going to go into private practice where I can do things the way I want to do, because I know what works for me. And recognized that I was having the same conversation with people. Like every new client, I would at some point go, okay, you know what? I just need to talk to you for 5 minutes. I need to explain what's going on in your brain. I want you to understand that you are a strong person and you are a survivor, and all the things that you see as weakness and stuff is your brain trying to keep you alive because of what you've been through. And let me explain what's going on, because this is something we have to work with. We can't take over. Your body's survival mechanisms are not something that you can will yourself through. And I ended up pitching that book in particular. That wasn't the book that I at that time had designed. That I decided that I wanted to write. I was working on another one because I didn't want to write. And I pitched that one just kind of, I wonder if anyone would be interested in this, because nobody's talking about this. And then the company that I pitched it to picked it up. They're like, oh my God, you're right. Nobody's talking about this. And we want to lead that charge. And we want you to sound like yourself. We want you to write the way you talk and be authentic. If you try and write a book for everybody, you've written a book for nobody. So we don't want to change your voice. We don't want to change who you are. We're going to, make it legible, but we want this to be you speaking to people, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And that's the book Unfuck Your Brain, which continues to be a bestseller, even though it's been out for a few years now, probably because the world is a shit show. I mean, I would much rather not be a bestseller and have people be in a good place in their life, but at least I get to provide a tool in the process, since that's where we are.
Yeah. And it's a very, very good book. And one of the things that you, like you mentioned, that you talk about a lot in that book and in a lot of your other books, you say finding the biochemical root of the problem is what can make people feel a little less crazy.
Yeah.
And you touched on that, but could you go deeper into that?
Yeah, I mean, the example that I give in Unfuck Your Brain, and all my books go into this, and the book I'm editing right now is in bringing the body into it and talking about the body, mind, and connection, which took a while to convince. I'm like, I don't want to write a book about the keto diet. Like, I promise it's not going to be a diet and exercise book, but let me talk about the body. So the example that I use is the screaming at a tape player. So if you have a trauma history, then that memory gets stored as a way of protecting you. So if you grew up and maybe your parents are doing the best they can, I think most people are, but you didn't have enough food, or you had a parent that wasn't around a lot, or you lived in a violent place, or you did suffer some form of abuse, your brain is going to store that memory, and it stores it a very specific memory. It's called an episodic autobiographical memory, and it's like, okay, so mark this. We need to keep an eye out for this, and I'm going to err on the side of caution, and anything that reminds me of this, I'm going to tell you need to get the fuck out. And so it's like, it's a tape playing for people who are old enough to remember tapes. Once that hits, once that goes, you can't stop it, right? It's not a matter of like, you just need to push through and, you're stronger than this or whatever. That's like screaming at a tape player. It's just playing. So you push play, it's going, and your brain's doing this thing like, I'm telling you need to get out. I don't know what you're doing. We got to go. And you can't say like, stop it. This isn't rational. We can't really take control of it in that way. Ma'am, no ma'am. And you can't scream at a tape player to make the tape stop. And so we're having to work with the fact that this is something that the body is doing to keep us alive. The body's like, I'm trying to keep you alive. You're being very ungrateful. If you fight me, I'm going to win, is what the body's doing. And so we're having to work within that process. It's not something you can just like, hey, you need to, you need to be strong. You need to push through. This is all in your head. What's wrong with your thinking process? I was the person, like the very first semester of graduate school, was saying like, CBT is fucked up. What if everything you're thinking is right? Like what if it is, I tell people like, oh, well, you need to work with your thought process because your thought process is messed up. Like, no, everything they're going through is completely accurate. Like, have you met my clients? They're on the streets, they're addicted to H, they have schizophrenia, everything that they're thinking about the world is true for them. So we need to work with that rather than tell people, well, you need to do a yoga and take a bath in lavender oil and have happy thoughts. And that was kind of the crux of what I wanted people. And so I have people like, oh my God, why hasn't anyone told me this?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It was refreshing. Yeah. That's the word I'd use in reading all your books, the refreshing.
Yeah. So if I could just for a minute, bring it back to everything that we're dealing with today. So the COVID-19 pandemic. I think, in general, we look at the news every single day and we see that ticker just keep growing, the number of people who are dying from this pandemic. And I think, we've all become sort of numb and sort of just desensitized to it all. We can't even comprehend, or see the lives that are attached to the numbers and the many millions more that are the loved ones of those who died. But, I think, at this moment, it's, the pandemic has taken 500,000 lives. But, it's becoming clear that we're facing one of the most serious mental health crises that we've ever seen, and people are drawing, direct links to the pandemic. So I guess from your perspective as a licensed counselor who studies these issues, what do you think, where do you think we are, and where do you think we're headed in terms of mental health, and this pandemic?
Yeah, and it's tough because every therapist who is doing this, we're going through it too.
Yeah.
We're going through it with our clients. We're having to parallel process. And like I was laughing. I saw like, the little Funko Pop toys. They have the everyday heroes of like the doctors and the nurses. And I'm like, where's like the trauma therapists with our weighted blankets and our squishy toys? That part of it is because I'm living it with people. Like I may not even know like where we all end up. I know that the things that have been the most useful is even just, first of all, validating what people are go through. Just like, but like this is such a good time for you to like work on your home Tai Chi practice. And that may be true, but that may not be helpful if people need the validation of this sucks. And so a lot of what I do is that I've had clients tell me just the fact that you're like, yeah, you're right. This really sucks. And you're dealing with a really difficult thing. And I'm really proud of you is helpful. And trying to find, because this is so disempowering and so frustrating. And then we see these people, I live in Texas, people running around licking doorknobs like, it doesn't exist. And that's frustrating is, finding places where we can take back a little bit of power as much as possible, which may mean not doom scrolling or choosing which news feeds we watch. Like I can't watch my governor. Like I get hot. I can't. But I live in a city where I can watch the city updates, and that feels very calm and very reasonable and very factual. And you can get an idea of what's going on without getting mad. And, doing as much as I can in the short term for myself, back over the holidays, which like Christmas time for trauma therapists is like tax season for accountants. It's already really busy. So I'm like, okay, I'm not taking any new clients. I'm not going to do any media. I'm going to really focus on my self-care and have and I already have good boundaries for myself, but got really stricter with that. And that sort of gave me a sense of it. And also, trying to plan things with hope. Okay, when we see the light of this, what are the things that I want to, focus on and do for myself, and being able to think hopefully about the future, which is very Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, I guess, but that kind of stuff has been really helpful for me as well. And from, my clients going through this, that's been the focus of like, what do you need to do to be safe? You have permission to like, if, you do not need to engage with your racist, anti-masker, uncle, like if you need to skip Thanksgiving, you skip Thanksgiving, like I will write you a permission slip, and doing as much as we can in that domain of recognizing like this really sucks. And we don't have a lot of power. And of course, that's where a lot of that's coming from. Like people are thinking, being told to wear a mask is somebody else trying to take my power versus we're just trying to get you to care about other people, but okay. And you don't have to, you can love people from a distance if you don't have the mental energy to argue with people about this shit right now. I've been doing a lot of that, but also recognizing that sort of as this continues to shift and grow, how it's going to affect us in the long term. Just like, for 9/11, there's people that, were really still dealing with stuff many years later, and people that weren't there, but, so that was that collective trauma that we all witnessed. So I will probably have a better answer in like 5 years. Because right now it's like, I'm like being well aware that this is fucking me up too, and doing my own work and then allowing people to like, this sucks and it's allowed to suck and you're allowed to feel bad. And what can you do right now that'll help 3%?
Yeah. Right. And I read an article recently that talked about how many people are hitting a so-called pandemic wall. Right. And with the fatigue of dealing with it for so long and the uncertainty as to when it's going to be over, it sort of feels different than when the pandemic first hit. Right. Yeah. And you kind of talked about it, but what advice would you give to people on dealing with a so-called pandemic wall at this point in early 2021? Yeah.
I know we probably all did that. Like last March, I was on book tour when the world shut down. And so it was like, oh shit, so once I was able to actually like physically get home, Like, okay, this is what it's going to be for, a month or so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that was so cute of us. And, and people like were really gathering around and who needs food, and we're putting everything online, and, and people are still doing a lot of that, but it really felt like this, we're going to rally around and, put this energy into it to push us through. But now we're like 10 months in. And I think people are still doing that. I still see people doing amazing things in that regard, but we're also fucking exhausted. So my husband is also a writer, and he's been working on this one article for a few months. Not to call it out, put my husband on blast. And I was like, so how's the article going? He's like, oh, it's almost done. I'm like, well, how's that article going? I'm like, oh, because I just wanted to read it. I wasn't like checking on him.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I printed it out to look at. And he finally is like, I don't have it. Like, I'm just not interested in it. I'm exhausted. Just like low, run down all the time. And, so just even with him, I'm like, well, then don't work on it right now. Is there something else that would be exciting to work on? Like doing some research for another project that feels good. I do have a postdoc in clinical nutrition. So recognizing that part of that is that chronic upregulation of inflammation. So let's treat that and see if that helps your physical body feel better. And also, like, you have permission to not do that. Like, and that's not his primary paid job. So some people don't, if that's the job that pays our bills, we got to go. So fortunately he was able to go, okay, I'm not going to do that right now. But even for job stuff, it's like, just do a fine job. People that are very high achievers are like, I'm not operating at the level that I'm used to operating at. Like, and that's fine. But like, you're the only person probably who's disappointed in yourself. You don't need to operate at 200%. You don't even have to operate at 100%. Like, do 75. Like, it's okay. Just do the best you can with what you have and recognize that where that is. And then, and then bringing the body back into it. I noticed that like I was eating like by the end of last year, I was eating like shit. Like for me, I was eating like shit and not moving my body and all those other things. And started after the holidays, like, you need to stop putting shit in your body, no more refined sugar, you need to be going walking, doing more yoga, those kinds of things. And that's also really helped me. And it has to be something that you like. I don't believe in like punitive exercise, but doing the things that your body likes to do. Like we used to play, it used to be fun to play, find what play is for you. And those things help because it dissipates some of that cortisol. It really helps with the inflammation, the neuroinflammation, all of those things. We're having to it's like we have a bunch of tiny little Lego bricks and we have to find the ones that go together to build up some support for ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So on the topic of food, if I could ask, I guess an interesting personal question about food, since you are a nutritionist as well. So I'll just preface it by giving you, I guess, a rundown of my own, I don't know if you want to call it diet or whatever, but and I'm beginning to see that it might be a problem. So
you're still young, just
yeah. So I find that I sort of eat the same things every day, like almost to an extreme, like where like if one thing is not the same, it throws me off, whether it's my anxiety or, the way I look at myself, the way I perceive myself. From your perspective, is this a good thing or a bad thing to eat the same things every day, even when it is like healthy and, whole foods, not like pizza every day, but healthy whole foods, is that a healthy,
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of like if you're eating pizza and cake every day, I'm like, let's look at that. But it's very soothing to have some kind of predictability.
Yeah.
And so like this, I know this works for me. My body responds really well to this kind of energy. In fact, I won't even use the term calories. Calories are energy. So like what kind of energy does your body need? And if your body's doing well on that, then it can be really soothing. I mean, my husband's a Mexican, so he'd eat tacos every day. That's just food. So that, it's more of a matter of people who have, The disordered eating is when it's, I starve myself and then eat a bunch of candy. I'm like, okay, so let's work on that a little bit. But if you like, hey, I do really well, I have my omelet with broccoli or whatever it is, then that's fine. You're getting
Okay.
all your essential amino acids and your body's running well. Yeah.
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 I'll have to get my levels checked to make sure everything's all right.
Right. That's what I wonder all the time. Like, how do you differentiate between if it's the food that's just making you feel off,
Mhm.
or if it's really something else going on?
I mean, in the food, even if there's other stuff going on,
Yeah.
the food is contributing. So I think looking at our food is always important. And I
Yeah.
tell people, like, I can look at your labs, there's a lot, and there's a lot of fancy testing we can do. There's those like breath tests that can tell like how your body's metabolizing lactose, all that stuff. But honestly, like your body is your best Fitbit.
Yeah.
And so that's why things like Whole30 and those kind of low FODMAP or AIP diets are helpful, because they're pulling the foods out that we typically know can be problematic for people. And then you give your body kind of a chance to reset, and then you add things back in one at a time, and your body's like, man, we're not doing that no more. Then and that's free, right? It's free to like take crap out of your diet and see how your body responds to things. Like I can't have dairy. I'm allergic to dairy. Again, like very common native issue. Nobody on that side of the family can have it. But I didn't know that I was responding very poorly to soy. I didn't know that I was having issues with artificial sweeteners. Like I should have known. They're crap, but I didn't. And like taking that stuff out and then recognizing that I don't feel good when I eat this. My gut doesn't feel good when I eat this. I need to get off my shit is really helpful. And you can buy shakes and powders and do these cleanses, and sometimes that can help it happen a little faster because it's kind of pushing things through your body a little faster. But it's really free to just do an elimination diet and see how you feel.
Yeah. Interesting. So I guess moving on to a different topic, anger, which is something you often mention as well. And in your book, Unf Your Brain, you say that in other countries, you don't find as many anger responses as you do in the US. And you point out how in Japan, in particular, individuals are explicitly taught in school the difference between what they feel on the inside and how they present that to the world, or how you should present it to the world. And kind of in contrast, you talk about how the U.S. people tend to have a very difficult time managing.
Yes. We
anger.
do enjoy being angry. Yes.
Yeah. And how it's almost viewed as a good thing, though, which you mentioned a few times. So I guess my question is, what could the U.S. do better to equip people to deal better with anxiety? Or anger.
I think that going back to having that, it's cultural, right? Like there's this, and I mean, and some of it too is, we bitch at men for being angry, but what emotion do we allow men to have? And I don't say that as like other men, like we all do. That is the appropriate emotion to have. Anger is very masculine, and you're not allowed to be sad. You're not allowed to be frustrated. You're not allowed to be worried. You're not allowed to be those other things. So that's part of it, is letting all people have a wide range of emotions. No emotions are good or bad. There's no right or wrong. It's just information from your body. And then teaching people, the thing I tell my clients is you are not responsible for your first thought. You are responsible for your second thought and your first behavior.
Yeah.
So when that anger comes up, it's telling you something. And I write a lot about how anger is a secondary emotion. Your anger is kind of your body getting energetically to deal with something else underlying. So you're like, I'm pissed off. Doesn't mean that you need to go, fucking storm the Capitol. But it's something to pay attention to and then do something with. And I've had a lot of people like, that's helpful, like, because we feel bad about it. Like, I can't believe I'm having this thought. That's not cool. Or we embrace it and then versus going like, okay, that's my first thought. So what's up with that? I do a lot of like curiosity rather than deciding whatever you're thinking, feeling is good or bad, right or wrong. Curious. I wonder where that's coming from. I'm really pissed about that. What's up with that? And I do that with myself and with a sense of humor, like, okay, well, you're like, you got hot about that. What's up? Come on, Lassie. Did Timmy fall in the well? What's up with you? And that kind of takes the pressure off of it. And I'm just kind of engaging, like, my emotions are not me, the diffusing from my emotions. Like, we get fused. Like, I am anger versus I'm having an experience of anger and I wonder what my body's telling me.
Yeah.
Like Candace Pert wrote a lot about that in the 80s, about the molecules of emotion, that literally this is something that comes from our body to give us information to pay attention to. And then again, getting into like epigenetic trauma and things, there's things that get held in our body that we have to work through. And we're seeing some good and some kind of surface work about just how rachist this country is from the get-go. And that's the other kind of stuff we have to work through. Like, and I'm all for, like, let's change the names. We'd be thrilled to, not have Native mascots anymore, but we also need to do the deeper work around stuff like that versus, like, instead of buying a BLM sticker, can we actually do something about, the number of people being killed by the police, those kinds of things. And I think that, so the history of racism, people talk about Nazism and fascism. Hitler got his ideas from us. What he called his Bible was a book of anthropology that came from the US. So this is what we were built on. This is what we were structured to do. And once slavery, after the Civil War, I don't want to say slavery became illegal because that's not really going to be true, that it was accomplished in other ways instead of it became backed up with science. Like, so we've always had this history. Like, there's this underlying current that we really haven't done our work with. So Franz Boas is the anthropologist. He was like the renegade anthropologist. He was the mentor to like Zora Neale Hurston and Margaret Mead and all the people that, like, culture is just culture. There's not good or bad. You can't measure people's forehead, decide who's deserving of money. And so he was the one that was sort of the one that kept pushing back against that movement, which is the only reason we've kind of had any movement at all. And somebody asked him at one point, they're like, okay, so if there's no cultural norms, is there one universal? And he said, well, you can't use what you don't have. Meaning, like, if you go to some, you're embedded with some tribe, you can't say that marrying your first cousin is bad or wrong if they don't have a concept of first cousins, right? Is kind of what he was saying. But then the opposite's true. You use what you have. So if that's what our country was built on, if we have like this underlying current of our country was built on this power over dominator model, and ours is mostly race-based, we have other shit that we do too, then that's a current that we're always dipping into because it's there for us. And you don't have to believe like all the ideologies of white supremacy to be drawing from that current. And a lot of our anger and stuff comes from that, of rather than telling poor white people in Appalachia, you're getting fucked too. Yeah, you're fucked too. But if we can draw from this system of I'm getting screwed because of these Mexicans crossing the border or something instead, then like we invoke the anger, and then we have, we're having these fights all within what the same 20 billionaires are doing just fucking fine.
Yeah.
That was a long ranty answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was.
Yeah, my research is epigenetics, so I get.
Okay.
I get.
Yeah, that was great. And before you get into, we want to talk about a few videos that have circulated recently that relate to that. But the concept that you talk about, known as grounding, I really found that amazing. Sort of, and I find that I do it every day. Centering yourself to the present moment. I guess, can you speak about that and how can people utilize grounding when they're experiencing a mental health crisis or any other?
Yeah, I think grounding is that big universal. When people say like, okay, well, if you can just teach everybody like one skill, what would it be? And I would say grounding, and you expressed it perfectly when you like centering back into the present moment, is getting back in our bodies, because it's really easy to get out of our bodies. We depersonalize, we disassociate. Things feel so bad that we just float on out.
Yeah.
And also back in the present moment, because we can live in the storytelling, right? Like the default mode of the brain is the storytelling brain, is we're telling stories about all the shit that's going on or might be going on, and then the story becomes our truth. And if we can get back in our body, then we're back in the actual situation versus the story we started telling ourselves about it.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to find ways to be safe in our body, and that also we're much more likely to be able to manage those trauma activation moments. If this is what's going on, if you get like, okay, well, let me get back in the present versus the story I'm telling about it, then I can work from that place versus whatever chaotic story is going on or whatever, anxiety stories going on. And we don't, that gets in the idea of fusion again. We don't become our thoughts. We can recognize that it's something that we're experiencing, but we have to, be in that moment. So it's, a lot of people like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk have been writing about, bringing the body back into therapy. Like in Bessel's book has been a very consistent bestseller for that reason. But it actually goes back further. There's a book called Focusing. It's by Eugene Gendlin. And he was a therapist in the 50s and 60s. And in doing couples therapy, he's like, why are some people getting better and some people are not? Like they're getting divorced. And it doesn't seem to be like, oh, well, because like all of these people cheated and all of these people just didn't do the dishes. And so he was taping, because you did that back then, and he watched like hundreds of hours of tape, and he realized that the people that were in their bodies were the people that were able to then connect to their partner and heal their relationship. Like they had to be aware of what was going on in their own bodies, because when we dissociate from that, we get crazy. And so he created a technique called focusing. Like some people do this intuitively. How can we teach people to do this? And so even like people like Peter Levine, who does somatic experiencing, like all that stuff, they got it from Eugene Gendlin. In fact, Peter Levine is like, yeah, that he was the man. That's where I got it from. So that like we've known for some time that we have to be in our bodies to have any chance of healing.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Well said. To get back to what we were talking about racism and what the country was founded on, I don't know if you saw a video that circulated recently around the news and social media, but it was of a 9-year-old black girl from Rochester, New York, nearby, we're in upstate New York, so Rochester, New York. And the video shows her being placed in the back of a police car. And she was eventually pepper sprayed because she wouldn't put her feet in, wouldn't get all the way in the car. And
she was handcuffed.
She was handcuffed, yeah.
Sprayed.
And what stood out the most when I was watching it was the way that the police officers were speaking to her. Mm-hmm. So I think one police officer said to her, "Stop acting like a child." And shortly after,
actual baby, yes.
Exactly. And shortly after, pepper sprayed her. And racism obviously played a factor, or whether it's obvious to some people or not, it's clear that it played a factor. And it's obviously another example of how there needs to be change in how police officers interact with communities and communities of color, especially. But my first question on this topic for you is, what does this do to a 9-year-old girl, mentally and emotionally, who is a baby, a child? What does it do to someone?
First of all, and it depends too, because it depends on what she goes home to and the support that she gets. We all have these protective factors, right? If she's able to, when she gets home, to get the work of, like, you didn't do anything wrong, that wasn't fair, to be able to teach her to ground, to regulate, to recognize this is not something she has to internalize as something that she did wrong, or there's something wrong with who she is. most people get through those, but we have to have this support. And of course, not everybody does. The 9-year-olds who go through that come home to chaos, or even come home to like very well-meaning people that's like, just put it behind you, baby. Like, you don't have to worry about that no more. Like, just put it behind you, just put it behind you, rather than getting that chance to work through it, are the people that tend to have problems later. Because I work with a lot of people that are much older, that they're dealing with shit that they never got a chance to deal with when they were young.
Yeah.
So, I remember, I'm in San Antonio. So after Hurricane Katrina, we had a lot of shelters in San Antonio. San Antonio's traditionally been a sanctuary city. We bring in people from everything all the time. Right. And, and seeing that even in the shelters in, and, people talking about like, hey, all these kids are going through this. They need therapy. They need a chance to get their minds right. I remember like seeing this clip and like, yeah, I need to be volunteering at the shelters, and being able to be there and, have a sense of security with people, and just let them process. People lost everything. And so the only possessions they had with them were whatever they got by donation and stuff. And so I would see in the show, like, people like packing and unpacking and sorting the same things over and over and over. Like, they were processing, and just being able to let people have their experience of processing however they're doing it is what helps people, because we're not gonna escape trauma. I've been through fucked up shit. I'm sure y'all have been through fucked up shit. When we've had that chance to heal from it, and space to recognize, like, yeah, that was not okay, and the things that happened to you were unacceptable, and and believing you and giving you space to be angry and space to be sad and to process through. So it's not that we get better, we get better at it. Like, that's never going to leave her. She's always going to have that experience. But when she can recognize herself as a survivor rather than a continued victim, that's where the healing is. Whatever happens to us, the trauma recovery happens when we no longer are being activated, and that's happening again in the present, and we're just reliving it and reliving it. When that's going on, we're still victimized. And we were victims. I'm not saying that we weren't, but we have to recognize that now we're survivors, and that's something that we survived. And that's where we shift from being, actively hurt by something to something that is in our past.
Yeah. And trauma has so much to do with a lot of mental health issues. That's your research, is trauma.
Yeah.
But another video which I'm not sure you saw, it was of a black police officer from Louisiana. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that video where he posted a video, and posted it online. And in the video, he talks about his sort of sadness for the way that black and brown people are treated, and his sadness that, human beings have really lost sense of how precious life is, and how precious every single life is. And then after that video, unfortunately he took his own life. But so I guess, and I know there's no simple answer or reason as to why people, ultimately come to the decision, to commit suicide or, do, harm themselves. But, what do you make of that? I know the data is really overwhelming when you look at it. I think close to 130 people, according to the CDC, die each day from suicide, and half of those from guns. So, what do we do as a country, as a people, to sort of get that number down?
And the number with veterans is also really high, because we're talking about populations that have access to firearms and those kind of things. I work with a lot of police officers, and I'm in Military City, USA, military vets, sheriff's department, and they're telling me the same thing. They're like, I'm here because I see how fucked up it is. They're like, I see my coworkers becoming monsters, for lack of a better word, of people that were good-hearted, who came into this because they wanted to actually protect and serve, and they see fucked up shit, and they weren't doing their work around it, and so they become these people that are pepper spraying fucking babies. And so the people that are doing, and of course, part of it too. So one of the big issues that we have is if you're seeing somebody within the system, then they have access to your mental health records and those kinds of things, which is why I'm actually a private pay therapist. The system is that if you accept a certain insurance, then you're forced to. So if I don't accept any insurance, then everything stays private and I don't ever have to send any records. So I get a lot of those people because they know that they can actually keep the confidentiality and tell me what's really fucking going on. And it's not going to be something that's now going to be part of their military record or their record with SAPD. So we need the space for people to be able to do that raw, authentic work without punishing them or fucking up their careers over it. Is a lot of it. And I mean, people are suicidal because they're fucking exhausted. They're in so much pain. They don't anticipate any mechanism for the pain to stop. I mean, the thing that I tell people who really struggle with suicidality is there's some part of you that tells me, there's a part of you that comes back. There's a part of you that tells me I'm not doing well, knowing that I will hospitalize you. And that's the part that I need you to continue to listen to. The part that says, trust Faith, reach out to Faith. She's going to keep me alive until I can get through this. And so that part of people that's saying that, you know, is fighting for life is the part that we need to listen to, even if it's like this really tiny part. And I also tell people politically, I'm like, you know what, if you have the kind of life that if you died, Mitch McConnell wouldn't give a fuck, like you have to stay alive for political reasons. You know, like if you being alive and you've got unicorn hair and you're genderqueer, you know, whatever it is that just kind of pisses off the establishment, then we need you here because you're the one who's going to change the world. And I need you to stay alive as a political act. And sometimes that works with people too. I mean, so much of it is culture. Like if we don't privilege life, if we don't recognize common humanity, MLK called it the thingification of human beings. When we start thingifying human beings, then it becomes very easy for people to internalize that or to even like, you know, bring that into themselves. And it's about recognizing that rather than having a dominator model of society, which is what we were founded on and which is what we continue to perpetuate, is we do have the capacity, humans have the capacity to also have these what are called partnership models, using an anthropology term. And that's the movement that we need to have in order to survive.
And I think that gets to something I want to read a quick quote from your book. This is Your Brain on Anxiety. So it goes into how you talk about the European American male view. So you say the whole field of psychology is based on the worldviews of European and European American men with significant educational privilege and at least some level of financial privilege. So with that in mind and what you just kind of touched upon, how does privilege or lack thereof affect somebody's mental health and overall health or life?
So the model that I work from is called RCT. It's relational cultural therapy. And it's this idea, first of all, is putting aside that sort of dominant model of you just need to get to the point where you don't need nobody, which we don't. We heal in relationships. We're hardwired to connect. And we started like, and it actually came, you know, from women in the field saying like, it was this idea that women have have more mental health issues than men because we're like the caretakers and we care more about relationships than ourselves, but we're supposed to. And then the cultural part of it is recognizing the impact of our external culture on our daily lives, going back to the idea of you can't tell people that their thinking is faulty if they are correct, if life sucks, if they are correct. So, you know, RCT has always been the model that I worked with. We now have the power threat meaning model, which is fairly new. I actually created a little workbook using like critical race theory, relational cultural theory, and power threat meaning. So rather than saying what's wrong with you, it's asking what happened to you. And people get very butthurt about the word privilege. Like, you don't even know, I've been through a lot. I'm like, this is true, but you didn't have to go through that. And that's all we're saying. And once we start recognizing where we have privilege, then we can utilize it. That's where the partnership model comes in. We utilize it to care for others. I have past privilege. I will get some kind of like, what are you? I mean, I live in South Texas, so people just come up to me and speak Spanish. But I don't read threat on the skin tone variation, right? And there's privilege in that I can then use. And I can be like, well, you don't even know. I mean, I'm Choctaw and I've been through shit. And I had IRB throw my research in my face and you don't even know what I've been through. Or I can say, I've been through shit, but I don't have to go through that. So how can I use that experience to then help other people? Right? You know, I have the privileges of having a roof over my head. And people are like, well, I worked hard for it. Nobody said you didn't. But if somebody is living in a tent in the field behind the closed Kmart, you have more privilege than them. Nobody's saying you didn't work hard for it. Nobody's saying nothing about what you've been through or not been through. But just we tend to get very prickly about that versus saying like these are things that add up. And we know, like when it comes to suicidality, for example, it does tend to be European Americans that commit suicide more than people of color. But then if you add LGBT status to it, because then you've got two things that you're, then the numbers really spike for people, for BIPOC people specifically. You know, Black and Indigenous numbers tend to be, of all people of color, they tend to be the highest in terms of being murdered, of being targeted by the police, of being, raped, those kinds of things. So, we can see like there's a strength there at one thing, but then when you add that other intersectional identity to it, and then there's issues not only with that and how that's perceived in the country, but then that's how that's perceived in our own community. Yeah. Then those numbers go back up. So recognizing there's all kinds of places where we can have issues or not have issues. And like, I have the privilege of also being very non-threatening. Like, I look like an Ewok. I'm not scary. So I can say something that my best friend is also a therapist, also a counselor educator, and he's a big, tall, burly white guy. And so if he says the same thing that I say, he looks mean. And I say it and people are like, oh yeah, well, like that makes sense. Because I have the privilege of not being threatening. That I can say something and they're like, oh, okay. Like, because I'm just like this minivan driving mom or whatever so there's all kinds of places where we have, but I don't have the privilege of being male. I don't have the privilege of having grown up with money. What's financial security? I never had that. And so, we're always, if we're paying attention to, like, there's a bunch of moving parts, and it's not saying anyone's better than less than, but you can't say, someone's experience of trauma, you have to take into account all the shit they've been through and all the shit that they're continuing to go through if you want to give them any chance of hell of healing.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's well stated. If I could, something that really makes me angry, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is the line that we sort of draw, we as a country sort of draw between physical health and mental health. And people sort of think of it, anything from your eyes down is physical health, and, this is all you get for mental health. And, where, we know that that's wrong. Everything is connected. And I think, personally, I think we're decades away from truly being able to treat mental health, truly being able to think of mental health as being part of our overall health or part of our physical health. And I think decades from now, we're going to be looking back and sort of be shocked at how broken the system was and how little we actually knew. And I think, I always, think about the example of how, doctors back in the early 1900s, and you can find examples well before that, but in the early 1900s, when doctors used to, prescribe and treat the common cold with heroin.
I
Or
mean, you felt better, so
you know, and I think some of the techniques that we use today, you know, will maybe get lumped into that category of antiquated, you know, no longer viable treatments. So I guess, you know, my questions for you is, why do we separate mental health from physical health? And how far are we from truly being able to, you know, mesh the two together?
so first of all, thank you. You're letting me like I have these soapboxes, and you've let me like unpack and stand on all of them. We have the information. We know there is no delineation. We don't use it because there's no money in that. So even Charles Darwin was writing about this mind-body connection. And I have that book coming out actually in a couple months from when we're filming this. And so I unpacked a lot of that because we absolutely have the information. This isn't me just guessing. We do know that how the vagus nerve works is creating body-mind issues. We do know that inflammation in the body creates neuroinflammation in the brain, and at least a third of depression cases are related to neuroinflammation. We know that. We're not treating it because there's no money in that. There is money in Prozac. There is not money in broccoli. So, I mean, I can't write a book without, you know, getting uppity about some of those things. So I'm writing about a lot of that. But, you know, part of it was, so, you know, physiologists were trying to understand the body and mind. And, you know, Charles Darwin was like there is a connection there that we have to pay attention to. Traditional Chinese medicine has known it for 5,000 years. You know, acupuncture, what they call the Du channel, is the polyvagal the polyvagal system, the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve. Like they called it something else, but they knew what it was and they knew that it needed to be treated. So there were scientists that were saying this is absolutely connection. And then there's others because they started getting very interested in the mechanism of how medications would treat, you know, particular systems, like how does this medication affect the heart or how does this medication affect the kidney, that became the paradigm that we worked from. Like it didn't start from a bad place. It was like, let's understand the body as all these different separate parts. If we think about physiology that way, then we can study how, like, okay, well, what this medication does is it draws water. And so that's actually good for blood pressure because it's whatever. But that became the leading paradigm. And that's where the money is. The money is in drug development and these kinds of things. You know, and then, of course, that, you know, the foods that we subsidize are not the healthy foods. There is no money in the body mind. And that's the part that has to change because we absolutely know what we need to do. And that's why I got my postdoc in clinical nutrition, you know, and even, you know, 15, whatever years ago, I'm like, why does everybody that I'm working with very severe chronic mental health, or why are they also on thyroid medications? Why is every fucking one of them have a thyroid problem? What's up with this? You know? And so I'm like, I knew that I wasn't going to be happy until I figured it out. So I went back and I drove my ass to Austin once a month for a year and got my postdoc. Of really being able to recognize that connection and treat that. And there are people that are treating it, but that's not, like you said, like that's not the norm. We're still, you know, drilling holes in people's skulls and covering them with leeches, you know, in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not antidepressant. If it works for you, that's great, but they don't work for a lot of people. And whether it's working for you or not, we have to deal with the underlying issues. We know that all trauma, physical or emotional, causes inflammation. The body doesn't care if you're in a car accident or you witnessed, you know, one parent beating up the other parent. It's going to treat it all the same way. It's all trauma, and your body responds to trauma with inflammation because inflammation, you know, creates the ability to heal. Inflammation creates that we call sickness behaviors. Like you need to go lay down. We got to work on this. We need you to rest so you can heal. And it gets upregulated so that stays stuck on. And once we recognize that the body doesn't differentiate, the body doesn't care if it's physical or emotional, then we need to stop caring if it's physical or emotional and treat it.
Yeah, that's and another thing along these same lines is the sort of the bureaucratic nature of mental health care and healthcare in general. I think that, you know, that it really can hurt a lot of people. You know, people, whether people are waiting to receive certain services or they can't get access to certain services. And of course, you need a level of bureaucracy. You need a level of organization to keep things, you know, organized. But not so much that it strangles the entire system.
Right.
And I think that, it's a hot topic today where we talk about fixing the system. But first you got to identify what system, and it's a slow moving process. But, do you sort of get frustrated with the bureaucratic
Oh yeah.
nature of mental health care
Yeah.
or health?
I loved working in community mental health. Like I was very devoted to that and wanted to change systems. And I finally got so tired of not being able to do it, at least in the long term. That's why I went into private practice. My husband is a recovery coach. He works with individuals, with substance use disorders and usually mental health issues, definitely trauma, those kinds of things. And he's like, if I could just like collect up everybody and have you feed them for a month. Oh my God. Like I need $1 million in a building. If somebody wants to give me $1 million in a building, like I'm going to make some shit happen.
Exactly.
That like seeing that he's like, I know, like I see how they eat. I see where they're living. Like if we could just like change all that for a month.
Yeah.
Like even in my dissertation research is like, we pull people out of a broken system and we put them inpatient or whatever. And then we put them back in a broken system. And then we wonder why they relapse. Right?
Yeah.
Like the system is like, even if they actually do access care and they get their 5 days in the hospital or they get their 30 days in rehab or whatever, we're putting them back into broken systems. In fact, I remember my dissertation chair was like, okay, so we have to have some conversations about your dissertation because the dean is not going to sign off on a counselor educator calling us false prophets of mental health. She's like, I love you and you're right, but you can't actually say that right now. We need to get you graduated. But that's been a continuous issue of and so there's some people that are like recognizing like I'm in this broken system and I need to find like these pockets of self-care for myself in these and some people are able to do that, but not because we supported them. They found something within themselves, or they found that one person that believed them, that one recovery coach, or whatever it was that worked with them. They did it through very strong will and some luck, and that's not the norm. So all these people are like, well, I grew up in like that, and I'm doing fine now. I'm like, bless you, did something amazing because the system was designed for you to fail.
Yeah, and working in a with my limited experience working in a community center, sort of that assists people with mental health care and behavioral issues, it's almost like you're chasing your own tail. Like I enjoy it a lot, and I love helping people, as cliche as it sounds, but when you feel like you can't cover like basic necessities, and people don't have those, it's like their days are spent thinking where they're going to get their next meal, where they're going to sleep, So I guess the question is, what do you do as somebody who works in a field, at case management or even a therapist, and you feel like you're chasing your own tail?
Yeah. And even as a therapist, I'm still doing a lot of case management.
Yeah.
Because I contract, like I take people from the Kind Clinic that are unfunded, and they pay me a little bit of money to see them, but not what my private people pay. So I'm still doing a lot of case management, even as a therapist, because there is such a high need. Yeah. And I think number one, all therapists need to be doing that. I'm not a social, everyone says you're a very good social worker with the wrong degree, is we need to be recognizing that and having those resources. And we have to be very creative, like with the work you're doing now, like you're having to get creative to help people. We're having to recognize and like validate for them. Like, you're right. This does suck. This isn't fair. Yes, I want to tell you to go make a stir fry for dinner, but you can't afford it. Like, I get that. So let's do the best we can with what we have. But then we also need to be advocating for changing the system.
Yeah.
There's so much network building and capacity building and, change being made by all the caseworkers and stuff getting together and doing shit. Or like, oh, I know somebody for this and I can get this and I can get that. And we were doing some really interesting things in Texas. SAMHSA was funding some very interesting research in that. And then we had the Trump years, and all of that was canceled. Specifically by the White House. So like all the work that we had been doing got shut down for 4 years. So, we're having to deal with that kind of stuff too. But so my husband, as a case manager, nobody has food. Even people that typically can buy their groceries can't right now. And San Antonio Food Bank's fucking amazing. And they're serving not just San Antonio, but all of this area. But you have to do a drive-through and then they put the food in your car, and that's great. But my husband's clients don't have cars. So we did a couple of things. There was a place that does produce boxes, Big Market Produce, for those of you who are in San Antonio. Buy from them because they're amazing. Because they said, how many boxes do you need? We'll load up your car. And so my husband would go and get tons and tons of boxes of fresh produce and deliver them. And his clients were like, and he was like, they're going to think this is stupid. His clients were crying, we're going to make soup. This is fucking cool. And then we were also because we can afford to, my books do well. So all that money gets just dumped right back in the community. I'm used to not having a lot, so it's fine. We were making food boxes ourselves, and I would fill his car every week. And so he would bring food to people that I was donating. So, most people in our field do that. And so finding those networks. And then when he moved to the organization he's with now, is his former coworkers is like, hey, who needs food? We'll still make you food boxes. I'll drop them off for you, whatever. And it's that, and it's, the churches, and it's, it's the church ladies every time doing that kind of work. Is we have to find and build those networks. Yeah. And that's the upside of social media. As I just put a message out there, like, hey, I'm spending hundreds of dollars a week making food boxes. I'm good with that. I can afford it. Is there anyone I'd like to expand this out. Can I find some support? And somebody's like, yeah, talk to Jamie. She'll give you veggies. And she did, and so we have to start being really more creative with stuff like that. And even the whole food supplements and herbs, the ones that work best are very expensive. And of course, those aren't covered, even if you have Medicaid. So some of the companies that I work with that create those say, hey, sometimes we get ones that, they'd expired last month, but they're still good. Or, people turned a bottle back into their nutritionist because they didn't like it as well. And so we have a half full bottle. We'll collect all those and, you can give them to other people who need them. We're having to do that, those communities of care and moving bottom up, because we're not getting it top down.
Yeah. Yeah. Got to use our own community.
Yeah.
We got to, we're all we have.
So you had two quotes in reading some of your works that really stuck out to me about anxiety. And they just stay with me. The first quote was, you say, anxiety is a classic human condition that we have been grappling with for centuries. And when I read that quote, the first thing that came to my mind was cavemen living millions of years ago, just dealing with anxiety and not sort of having the language or the tools to speak about it. But, I think as much as we like to think that anxiety is new and, it's not, but we definitely, are better able to describe it and have the language to talk about what it is. But I guess, what did you mean by that?
I mean that it's, again, I'm always trying to, whatever you're going through is normal. This is not a sign of weakness. Anxiety is a very normal, common human experience because we're self-aware. We know that we exist, and we know that at some point we won't. Nobody's getting out of this alive. And that we are, but we're primed for survival. And our human body, in terms of technology, our human bodies have not evolved as fast as technology has. So there's certain things that, since the industrial age, that are becoming more and more prevalent that activate anxiety, but that if we know that we exist and we know that at some point we won't, makes us anxious. Yeah. And if there's a dinosaur coming towards us, we're like, oh shit, so this is how we go, right? Anxiety is designed to protect us. And then the anxiety has become more and more prevalent because our bodies aren't there. We don't have the capacity to to recognize like, oh, like this isn't actually a threat to us because our bodies are still more primitive than our anxiety is. So, somebody being mean to us on social media feels, can feel is just as much of an attack as somebody coming after us with a club because we really so, but yeah, it was really like sort of that dawning of the industrial age. Western civilization is, just the problem for everything. Dawning of the industrial age that made us really recognize the prevalence of it. And then, we've been able to do these miraculous things with technology, but then there's that darker side of that we're always having to pay attention to. But it's kind of like Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear. We're supposed to have fear. We're supposed to be listening to those instincts and paying attention to those things. The problem is the differentiation. Robert Sapolsky wrote about stressing zebras don't get ulcers because they get chased by a lion, they go woo, and they run off, and as soon as the lion's gone, they're good again and they're eating grass. Because we have that that recognition and self-awareness of our eventual annihilation, we don't turn that off.
That's really interesting. And then the other quote that about anxiety is, you say anxiety is it's just a definition that you give that I thought, put it into words perfectly. You say anxiety is a state of full body disequilibrium. And I've never heard a definition really of anxiety. And I thought that was perfect. You don't, when you're experiencing anxiety, that something's off, but that anxiety can, come out in many different ways. And you talk about the, fight, flight, or freeze. But yeah, so that definition was great. And what in your mind makes anxiety a full body experience?
It goes back to the body mind. And that was the issue that I had. When you look up a definition of anxiety, you get the state of being anxious and you're like, cool, thanks. But anxiety's job is to get you to pay attention, right? All emotion, we have emotions because we are meant to pay attention. It's our body's way of saying, hey, this is good. We should do more of this, or we should watch out for this. I think that we're in trouble here. There's somebody coming after us with a club. And if it gets bad because your body's like, you're not paying attention, I'm gonna fuck you up. And that's basically what's happening. So our whole nervous system gets activated. Our whole vagal system gets activated. And the vagus nerve, the autonomic nervous system, is autonomic, right? And so it's not something we have control over. It's our body, how our body regulates all of our organs and stuff working. And that's the part that gets activated. We don't have control over it because our body's like, you're not paying attention. I'm going to get you to run. I'm going to get you to fight. I'm going to get you to roll over and freeze and hope that the predator goes away. But I am now taking over. So it's not just like, oh, this doesn't feel good. And we're sitting there drinking a mug of tea thinking that we're a little uncomfortable right now.
Yeah. Interesting. Is there one type of therapy or treatment that you see as most effective today? And I know that different types work better for different situations, different traumas. But I know you're actually trained in brain spotting. Is that so? Brain spotting, hypnotherapy, and then you also mentioned alpha stim, which the only one I'm sort of familiar with is hypnotherapy. But if you could describe what brain spotting is, and then alpha stim, and then, like I said, is there one treatment, one or the other, that's most effective in treating?
So there are, those are all evidence-based practices, and I'm a nerd, like I'm always studying different stuff. But what it comes down to, one of the interesting things is it's for every evidence-based practice, when they've studied them all and they did a meta-analysis looking at all the data from all the different studies, it's the common factors in the relationship. So I always want to use what resonates with my clients. So we have this idea of like, this is what creates problems. This is how we get better. And this is something we're doing in relationship. Me and you, we're a team. We're fighting this thing together. So I like things that are body based because I do believe that like a lot of this stuff is holding our body and we can't just do it up here. but there's also, I like to be able to have like a lot of different things to pull from. And I've been to I've been to a lot of trainings where they're like, oh, well, this works better for this and this works better for that. And I finally was at a training a few years ago and we were like, use whatever the client wants to use. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. So I'm trained in a lot of different things because I think they're all good tools, but knowing that we're coming back to the relationship in the end. Brain spotting, like you mentioned, it's EMDR combined with somatic experiencing, basically. And I like somatics. I like getting people back in connection with their body. And I think it's a little more gentler than traditional EMDR. Hypnotherapy, we're doing the same thing. We're learning to relax our body. And so sometimes we can just kind of get ideas in a little deeper because you're relaxed.
Yeah.
And, alpha stem, so there, neurofeedback is where you're actually doing the work yourself, and alpha stem is doing it passively, actively, like raising your alpha brain waves, which can be very, very calming. So, those are all like a lot of different tools. And so my clients know, like, we can pull kind of from anything here.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I like brain spotting is the founder of it is a very good, very well-known EMDR practitioner. And he recognized that he wanted to bring the body back into therapy, and he had met Peter Levine and, learned about that. But he also says, use whatever else you have. A lot of the like branded therapies are like, this is the way, the truth, and the light. So you have to do it this way. And he's like, no, like if you know a bunch of other stuff, use whatever. Yeah. So I may use brain spotting, but I'm going to bring in aspects of hypnotherapy. I use like a lot of like metacognitive therapy with anxiety of, getting people, the idea, like rather than get, content wrapped up in the content, the what of your thoughts, like let's think about how you're thinking instead of what you're thinking, those kinds of things, that everybody's different. And so I like having different tools.
Yeah. Okay. And one more question. So you may have talked about this a little earlier, but you say that only recently have mental health providers began incorporating trauma-informed care into their work. Could you break down what trauma-informed care is for us?
Yeah. So trauma-informed care means we're treating the trauma. That we're understanding that they have this trauma experience that has not healed. We've all experienced trauma, but trauma-informed care means that it's, whether it's PTSD or subthreshold, that the trauma has been driving this bus, and we need to be treating the trauma. You can't treat somebody's depression without treating what caused it. That's not something that there is, traditionally been a lot of training in. I know, like the program that I went to, which was an incredibly well-rated program in the country, just in the past few years, I noticed that they, were offering a class in trauma, but it was an elective. So we're still not very good at trauma-informed care. We're getting better at trauma awareness, but that's still not the same thing as trauma-informed care. Trauma awareness, like, oh yeah, bad things happen to you. That sucks. Anyway, so we're going to do our CBT worksheet today. I'm not ragging. I need to stop ragging on CBT. CBT is fun. I use it. But this idea that we need to do this recipe card treatment of like, okay, yeah. So you have a lot of trauma. I did your ACE score. You had an 8 out of 10. Right. Bummer. So let's go back to, teaching you acceptance and commitment therapy. I'll make fun of them instead. Versus being trauma aware of that, like the trauma experience is wrapped within all that, of recognizing, like doing CBT, of even recognizing maybe you're having a memory flashback. So you might not be having a thought or a feeling about the present, but you realize in certain situations that these very strong memories are coming up for you. You're having a flashback, right? Of like bringing trauma into all of it and recognizing it. And that's not letting the people off the hook. Oh, well, bad things happen to you, poor baby. I'm sorry. So it's okay to be an asshole to other people. It's recognizing that this happened to you. It now is your circus and your monkey. You didn't buy the ticket, but it's yours now. Yeah. And having to work within that framework of the recognition of, this is what I'm having to work with. I'm having to work with a nervous system that is dysregulated. I'm having to work with these unwanted memories that come up in these really fucked up situations. And it's not so simple as, well, I have clinical depression, so I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and that's going to help. That's part of it. That's only part of it.
Okay. So, and to end, in conclusion, I just want to read something that you write on your website, if I could real quick.
Okay.
So you say, going to therapy is not a sign of weakness. You say it takes an enormous amount of strength and courage to insist on taking care of yourself in a world that continues to tell you it doesn't matter. You also mentioned that how your clients continue to take your breath away, right? And constantly remind you that the world's a good place full of good people, and that the things we sometimes do don't have to define our futures. And I think that's a beautifully said statement and a good place to leave off, unless you have anything else you want to touch upon.
No, that made me sound like really late, so I'm good.
Yeah.
And just for everyone listening, if you haven't read any of Dr. Harper's books, definitely go check those out. Where can people find more about you in your books?
So my page, I have the intimacydoctor.com, and that's DR. Is my husband is really good at keeping that up for me, and like putting up my podcast appearances and when books are coming out. And then for my private practice, and I always have to tell people, like, I can only work with you if you're in Texas. There's no parity across states, because I have people ask me that all the time. But just kind of like my basic information about my practice is the Faith G. Harper page. I always encourage people, if you're reading my books, Jeff Bezos does not need our money. He's good. So my publisher actually has a storefront, and they distribute other companies, not just their own. So you can buy directly from them, and they're worker owned. So that's badass. That's Microcosm Publishing. And my books do really good at local bookstores. It's all like the radical leftist bookstores that sell the shit out of my books. So if you've got a radical leftist bookstore, they probably have my books.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any other books being released sometime soon?
Yeah. So we just expanded the anxiety book, actually, the one that you were talking about.
Oh, okay.
Like that book has done so well, and people were like, this tiny little motherfucking book had more good information about anxiety than all these sick books. And I'm like, could I expand that and give people more without it becoming cumbersome? And I'm like, yeah, I can. So I expanded it. It's still going to be like, in that $10 range. I think that one's $7. So, but I wanted to talk more about different diagnoses, of it, understanding why OCD is not considered an anxiety diagnosis, some of that kind of stuff. So that one is coming out. And then the book, so my follow-up to Unfuck Your Brain is Unfuck Your Body, with the understanding, like, I'm going to be talking about food and movement and stuff like that, but it's not this is a Wolf Robb, you need to do keto kind of book, but about the body-mind connection, of bringing the science back into it, of understanding inflammation, of understanding toxins in the environment, and all the things that we're having to work with. So those are the two that are coming out. The expanded anxiety book is in layout, and I'm doing edits on the body book right now. So they'll be out in spring.
This one really, really helped me.
Yeah.
Like I don't remember ever reading something like it. It's concise and like I said, straight to the point, and really, really helpful, because you don't only talk about where it comes from, but you give things you can do, and not like too technical, but breathing, creating coping cards. You said, name that. Give your anxiety an actual persona, but it's really, really helpful. And it's just wanted to make sure I said that. But
thank you. I mean, I was thinking, what book do I need on this topic? It doesn't exist, and then that's the book that I write. Like, I'm not trying to be cute.
Yeah.
I don't even like workbooks myself. So if I'm going to write one, it better be fucking good. I want to write the workbook that I would actually use, even if begrudgingly. So I'm just going into it, and there's people like, I don't like your stuff. I don't like your politics. I don't like your F-bombs. I'm like, you got to fucking stop reading my books then. But I've also had people tell me like very like conservative, like, I hate your politics, but I still fucking love your books. I'm like, okay, that's awesome.
That's how they'll say it.
I've had people they're like, I was rolling my eyes about all your politics, but still your book is good. I'm like, so if I'm right about the science, maybe I'm right about some of these. Just thinking. So it's always like the punk community found me first, like all the like the gutter punks and everybody, and so it's kind of starting to get into middle America now.
Right. Yeah. And your voice is exactly what I feel like
Yeah.
when I'm reading it. I'm like, I'm hearing your voice and I don't even know you,
Yeah.
but meeting you, it matches up perfectly.
Yeah,
So
and my clients tell me that they're like, "We're on vacation, so I'm not going to see you for a couple of weeks. I'm going to bring one of your books because then you just yelling in my head."
yeah.
Yeah, I think every one of your books should be your own original audio voice from when you do the
I-
audiobook.
Yeah.
I did it for Brain.
Yep,
So I did the audio for Brain, and then when we contract out, because Blackstone is the one that has that contract, they're like, we can do that. It is it's not just time consuming for them, it is time consuming for me. The person who does the reading, I think she does a really good job. I have gotten consistent feedback is we love it being you. I love like when it's you, then it's that we're having a conversation with you.
Yeah.
We're just not talking on the other end. So I think she's done an amazing job with something that would be really hard to translate if it's not her. But that probably needs to be revisited because I have been getting, oh, I liked it. And I've gone to events where like I have a super fan who is blind, but he recognizes my voice from that audiobook. She's like, she's here, I hear her.
Yeah.
So that probably does need to be revisited with the next contract. Not that she's doing a bad job, but people like me blessing them out in their ear, I guess.
Right. Interesting.
Well, listen, you are a hero. Keep changing the world one day at a time.
Yeah,
and
man.
We
Yeah,
really
don't
enjoy
you?
it.
Yeah.
Hey,
We really enjoyed talking to you, and we'll stay in touch and maybe have you on again at some point.
yeah.
Absolutely. Be happy to.